Hello again and welcome as we look at Lifeways Explore the Bible series on Matthew chapter 24. This lesson is called Alert. In Matthew 24 we have a continuation of what must have been a very long day. We believe it's still Tuesday of the Lord's Passion Week, and Jesus has faced multiple attempts to trick him into saying something illegal or contrary to the law. Back in 23, Jesus is still teaching in the temple grounds, and in chapter 24 starts with Jesus and his disciples leaving the temple area and going to the Mount of Olives. So chapters 24 and then 25 are referred to as the Olivet Discourse because he leaves the temple and goes to the Mount of Olives. In 24 verse 2, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple. I think that's an important contextual note to this whole chapter. Then in chapter 24, verse 3, the disciples ask him about his coming and the end of the age. And this begins a long message from Jesus. But here are a couple questions that I don't know the answer to. What did they mean by the end of the age? And then what did Jesus mean when he talked about the end of the age? We think we understand when it talks about Jesus coming, what he's talking about. But when we talk about end of age, does that refer to the end of the world history as we know it when Jesus comes back and establishes a millennial reign? Or could it mean the end of the age of the Jews and the beginning of the age of the Gentiles or the church? Or some other age that God knows about that I don't. What age are we talking about coming to an end here? And then, when he's talking about the Son of God coming in power and glory, is there another coming that we're overlooking? Is he talking about when he comes in judgment in the year 70 AD, just 36 years from when Jesus talked about this? The temple is going to be destroyed. Remember, that's what was talked about at the very beginning of this chapter. The temple is going to be destroyed. Jerusalem is going to be pretty much obliterated, God's people killed and scattered in 70 AD, and that sounds like a coming judgment. Is Jesus talking about how he will return and dispense justice and judgment upon Israel? Is that something that his coming alludes to as well? Now, this is all pretty shrouded in mystery. Now, that doesn't mean everything Jesus says is mysterious. He says some very clear, significant things about himself and about us in this passage. But the overall picture, there's still mystery here. And it doesn't mean that he didn't say some very clear, profound things. He very much did. So let's turn now to verse 36 through 41 of chapter 24. This is our first passage, and it talks about the unknown hour. Okay? So verse 36, but concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. 2 women grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know what day your Lord is coming. Now, one of the first things we see here is there something Jesus doesn't know? I can't remember another time he said something like this, that there's something I don't know. Only the Father knows. He said, not even the angels know. Only the Father. And this has caused a lot of consternation to the church over the years. How can it be that Jesus doesn't know if he's truly the Son of God? Well, some people will say, well, when God the Son became a human baby, he laid aside his divine attributes or his divine prerogatives to his abilities. Some go so far as to say he emptied himself of his divinity. I think that's dangerous talk for a Christian, okay? In Jesus' human nature, there were many things he didn't know. He couldn't know. It was his human nature. His human nature wasn't omniscient, okay? He was a man. But in his divine nature, I don't believe it's diminished whatsoever. Now, we know there were times that he knew exactly what people were thinking. And not because he was smart and made a good guess. He knew what people were thinking. He had some divine knowledge. I believe the answer to this passage about Jesus not knowing is simply this. Jesus humbled himself to the Father in coming to earth. Philippians 2 points out his humility in this way. And he depended on the Father to let him know what he needed to know. So he doesn't suspend his abilities, but he puts them in the Father's hands. And so we have this need to realize that in his divinity, he is fully God and fully man. But there are certain things he's leaving to the Father. Remember, he even told the disciples, I only do what I see my Father doing. He was so submitted to the Father. He followed the Father's lead in all the things that he did. So basically, in his submission to the Father, he is following the Father's lead on this. You can tell me what I need to know in my divinity, in my divine submission of the Son to the Father. I'm going to depend on the Father to let me know what I need to know. And he's going to follow the Father's lead in this. But apparently, there were certain things the Father didn't need Jesus to know. As his only Son, he's like, I'm going to keep this confidential for now. If we were to say that Jesus had given up his divine attributes or emptied himself of his divinity, my question would be, is God still God without his attributes? Aren't the attributes of God really describing what is part and parcel to the divine, to the Almighty? If you could remove his perfect knowledge or his power, is he still God? How about we go a little deeper? How about if we denied his utter holiness or his perfect love? Is he still God? I would say no. When we describe his attributes, we're not talking about things that God gathered to himself as skills. No, they're part of his nature as the divine. So does the divine nature of Jesus cease to be while he's walking the earth? No, it doesn't. He's fully man, but he's fully God. And then the next thing Jesus says here is, he is coming again. Verse 37 is real clear about this. And I also believe that this could be talking about more than one coming. We look forward to the one that's more glorious, but don't stone me for saying this, but I believe in one real sense he came in the year 70 and brought judgment upon Jerusalem. He didn't come in the resplendent glory that Thessalonians 5 talks about or Revelation talks about, but God did bring destruction to Israel and to that temple that Jesus foretold would happen in that year of 70 AD. And the next day of his coming is getting closer every day. And we look forward to that one. But here, he doesn't talk about the nature of his coming so much as the nature, in this passage, the nature of the world leading up to his coming. Verse 38 seems to describe business as usual, but people with no awareness of what God is about to do. And think about this, even though Noah is building this huge boat and preaching righteousness, preaching to the people that they should be right with God, and he's warning them of the judgment to come. And with all of these signs and all of this message, the people are shocked when the floods come. And so we have this picture of how the society is going to be leading up to the return of Christ. Then in verse 40 and 41, he gives an example of what it's going to be like. And I'll be honest with you. Growing up, I heard the ones taken were raptured in the day of the Lord. But in the context, verse 39 says the flood comes and washes people away that are unsuspecting. And I have to wonder, when it says one is taken as one left, is the one taken swept away by the judgment of the day of the Lord? I don't know. I said it's cloaked in mystery to me. So then we come to the next little passages, just 3 verse in 42 to 44. And the subject here is that we need to be alert. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. I think Jesus is trying to point out 2 concepts right here. To be alert and to be ready, because we don't know when he's coming. And I would add it would be foolish to speculate and predict the day. And many have tried to do that. Amazingly, every single one of them has failed to name the date. Not one prediction. I heard somebody say one time, if Jesus had planned on coming back on one of those days, he changed it when they predicted it. Now, I don't think that's the truth, but not a single prediction of the return of Christ coming at a certain day or certain time has happened. And I'm old enough to remember the book that came out in 1988 called 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming in 1988. And I've studied the prophecies that help give rise to the Adventists and to the Jehovah's Witnesses. These prophecies were utter failures. So they try to spiritualize the prophecy or change the date. They try all kinds of things. But what they reinforce is verse 42, and it's crystal clear. It's not for you to know. And Jesus couldn't be more clear on that subject. Now, almost all of us have had a surprise party for our birthday, or been a part of a surprise party, or seen one on a video or something. And when you see someone who's earnestly surprised and happy and appreciative of the effort that people took to honor them, that's just a great experience. It's a great thing to watch. Isn't it interesting that is nothing like the scenario that Jesus describes for his future coming? This is not a happy surprise. He describes it as a thief in the night. That's not how I picture the day of the Lord. I think of glorious sky, beautiful clouds, the Son of God descending on a white horse with the armies of God and all the saints who have gone before coming with him. And I think I get that from Scripture. I think that image is from the Word of God. But here, Jesus coming is likened to a thief in the night. And I think we need to take that to heart and recognize that Jesus is emphasizing something. The need to always be alert and to make sure we're ready. And at this point, you might just discuss with the class. What does alert look like? Now, we're going to go into another passage that may suggest some of that. But what does it mean to be alert? What was Jesus saying? And what does it mean to be ready? Now, the last passage we're going to look at starts in verse 45. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. And truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The big picture here is Jesus is saying, be a faithful servant. And going right along with being alert and ready, faithfulness just fits hand in hand with those things. Jesus uses the image of a servant who has a master, but he also has responsibilities. He's not the owner, he's not the head of the household, but he has the task of serving others in the household. Doesn't that describe every believer? Galatians 5:13 says that we are to serve one another. And in this little parable, the master is pleased to find that kind of faithfulness when he comes. In fact, he says the master will promote that kind of a servant, a faithful servant who is faithfully carrying out his responsibilities. But then he makes a contrast with a wicked servant. In fact, in this parable, he kind of makes it sound like, well, this servant could be a good servant and do this, or what if he's a wicked servant and he does this? Sort of a what-if situation. If the wicked servant starts to beat the people he's supposed to serve, the master will come by surprise and cut him in pieces. That's pretty graphic in there. It's kind of an ouch, like, oh my goodness. But the overall message of this passage is, be faithful in what the Lord has given you to do. Years ago, I saw a bumper sticker. I hope you're not offended by this. It said, Jesus is coming, act busy. And I saw the humor they were going for, but it was a sad humor to me. It wasn't funny. It was a horrible misunderstanding of so many things about God and about salvation. And I don't want you to take from this parable that the master's favor is all about your performance. That's not what he's saying. This is a description of what a faithful servant does. And where are they faithful first? They're faithful first in their hearts. They're faithful to God. And because of their faithfulness, they're going to serve Him. They're going to serve others. They're going to try to carry out their responsibilities in good faith. And that faithfulness, but also wickedness, can come from the heart. A truly redeemed person will be transformed into a faithful servant. But an unredeemed person, they may consider themselves a servant of God, but they're still behaving in a wicked fashion. And that will come out if the servant is wicked. In fact, that's the way he states it. This is what a wicked servant will do. He won't bear up under the responsibility. He won't be faithful to serve the way God wants him to serve. The master will be displeased in his service because it reveals his heart. being far from God and not wanting to be faithful. Now, God already knows who's redeemed and who's not. He knows who the faithful servants are going to be. But Jesus tells us this story, I believe, so we can be aware of what a faithful servant looks like and measure ourselves by His standards, not by our own. So, the bottom line of all this passage, it's not to lay out a perfectly timed eschatology so you know what everything's going to happen in the right order. That's not what Jesus was trying to do here. No one knows the day or the hour. No one. That's the first and probably preeminent point of those early verses. Secondly, believers need to be alert and ready for the coming of Christ. And believers should be faithful to the end as good stewards of God's resources and as serving God and serving others. And let that be the hallmark of our life as we do look forward to His glorious appearance. Thank you.